Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the backyard. If you are new to the channel, thank you for finding us. Welcome. If you give us a sub and a thumbs up and a comment and all that fun stuff, it would be much appreciated. I know I say it every time. I know I sound like a broken record, but it really does help. It's an exciting day. Because what are we here to talk about? Hell yes, Angela MAO, the double feature from Eureka Entertainment. This was released on October 3rd of 2022, so I do apologize that it's taken me a while to get around to reviewing this. I had yet another cold, so if you're keeping score, I've had 3 bad colds, which have lasted longer than a week each since late August. So that's like the past 6 weeks. I've been sick for like half that time. It's been really fun. But anyway, this is the release, and I'm going to be reviewing both the films on here and the release itself. They were both directed by Huang Feng, who also directed The Shaolin Plot, which I had previously reviewed, which has been released by Eureka. This was released, I think, in May of this year. So you can go out and get this, and I highly recommend this film. This was a really great double feature. I really enjoyed this. I really didn't know what to expect to these movies going into them because I had never seen either one of them before. And like I said, this was the only Huang Feng film I had ever seen, and I saw that pretty recently. So, and Carter Wong is in here, and Sammo Hung features prominently in both of these films. He is the fight coordinator of both, and he's in both of the films. And in the second film, which is, it says Hapkido and Lady Whirlwind, but on the inside, when you take the discs out, Lady Whirlwind is first. So that's the order in which I watched them. So in my mind, that's the order in which they exist. And on the back as well, it says Lady Whirlwind and Hapkido. So that's kind of how I watch them. And in Hapkido, Sammo is like one of the kind of, there's like 3 kind of main characters. It's a sister and 2 brothers. And I'm not sure if they're biological brother and sister or if that they're like, you know, brother sister because of their martial arts kind of fraternity. But that's their relationship, and Sammo plays one of them. So he actually figures pretty prominently in that. Like I said, Carter Wong and Chang Yi and Pai Ying is in here. And so these are, I'm going to give you like a basic overview. I'm just looking at my notes. I took a bunch of notes, like 4 pages of notes for this release. I have a lot to say about these movies. And there's a lot of bonus material on here, like a lot. There's 5 commentary tracks across 2 movies. And there's like 6 interviews, and there's a lot of stuff on here. And there's a booklet with essays on each film. I'm going to talk about everything. But in a nutshell, if you're not sure about this release, if you don't know if you want to buy it, I think it's actually a really interesting double feature, and a really kind of like, it's a good overview of the basher genre, which is like the genre of kind of martial arts films in the early 70s, kind of post Jimmy Wang Yu, post Bruce Lee, that are about kind of the violence and the impact and the use of filmmaking techniques to sell that, rather than, you know, just putting a camera down on a tripod and watching 2 great martial artists do choreography, right? It's a very different style, but it's a really interesting primer into kind of, or of that kind of world of very early martial arts films in the early 70s. These are both from 1972, so it's the 50th anniversary of both of these films. The reason being that they're very different movies. The first movie has this kind of, which is Lady Whirlwind, this kind of like handmade, raggedy, independent feel to it. There's a lot of like handheld camera, and it doesn't feel like quite as it feels like they're creating the language of martial arts filmmaking as they're making the movie. Like it feels very much like it's being pieced together as it's being made. But what's really interesting about this film is that even though it has this kind of handmade, more independent feel to it, the narrative is really sophisticated, and the characters are really interesting, and it's atypically complex from a moral and a kind of a story structure standpoint than a typical film of this nature. The second film is like, if someone said to you, which is Hapkido, if someone was like, hey, do you want to watch an early 70s kind of post Bruce Lee, post Jimmy Wang Yu martial arts, you know, basher, beat 'em up movie, Hapkido is exactly what you would expect you would be watching. It is an exemplary example of films from that era with just non-stop, badass, awesome fight scenes, people being thrown through walls, like blood. The first film is actually probably a little bit bloodier, but there's definitely like a kind of a Chang Che almost influence in the amount of blood that's going on in these films. It's not as bloody as his films, but there is a lot of blood in these movies. And it's just badass characters, a straightforward story, a story that's told really well, and just a fuck ton of fight scenes and really good villains. Like, you hate hate the villains in Hapkido. Like, they are horrible and they enrage you, and you want to see them get their comeuppance, and you wait and you wait and you wait, and then you're like, yes. So it's like a perfect old school, super early martial arts, like kung fu, I guess I should say, kind of movie. Both of these films, these big influence from Jimmy Wang Yu, and especially on Hapkido, I see a huge influence from those early Bruce Lee films. So I'm gonna show off the physical release here, and this is a double feature. As I said, so you get both of the films in here, and it has this slipcase, and you pull that out, and you have, this is the Lady Whirlwind artwork here, and then there's a poster, which is double-sided. And so it has Deep Thrust, which, if you saw me do my announcement video on this title, I absolutely cracked up talking about that alternate title of this film. And there you can see someone who looks nothing like Angela Mao wearing very revealing outfit. And then Lady Kung Fu on the other side. So these are the two period English language posters that you get there. And here's the back. I don't know what, if you can hear that, I don't know what that is, and I apologize for that. It's a truck, I guess, doing something very loud right down the street. And this is the Lady Whirlwind disc here. And this is the Hapkido disc right here. And then if we pull out the booklet, there are 2 essays in here by James Oliver, one about each film. And in the first one, he kind of contextualizes this film in the very early history of martial arts films and how it fits into this group of movies, like I said, where they are really kind of like figuring out the language of martial arts cinema and what martial arts movies were, kind of in a general sense. And you could see that sense of it being figured out as it was made. And there's an analysis of the film, and he talks about like the career of Angela Mao and stuff like that. Here you go. And then Hapkido, the essay, is actually really interesting because he talks about how it's a historically important film because it was, there's the Deep Thrust poster again, because it was really the first Hong Kong film and the first kind of Chinese language martial arts film, these films are in Mandarin, to foreground a foreign martial art, because Hapkido is a Korean martial art. So it is a historically important film and a very interesting film because of that. And he talks about Huang Feng's career. And as here you can see, there's Sammo Hung. I really like the artwork for this. I know that it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I'm just showing you all the pages of the booklet here. There's just a couple more. But I do really, and these are just the credits and an image here. I do really enjoy this slipcase. I don't know, I like the composition of it a lot. I like the energy of it a lot. I like the feeling of it, the lines. It encapsulates the films really well in my mind, and it does just a really good job of telling you like what this release is and what you're getting with it. So to get deeper into the films, I'm going to talk about Lady Whirlwind first. Like I said, the narrative of this film, the thing that really impressed me about this movie is that it has a complexity of moral consideration, which is something I noticed about the Shaolin plot too. It's not just like a straightforward good guy, bad guy, beat the shit out of everyone, movie is over. Although it does have elements of that. You essentially have 2 protagonists in Lady Whirlwind, and they are, it's Angela Mao and it's this guy here. They're not, it's not co-protagonists, right? So if you look at a movie like Super Cop, you could argue that Michelle Yeoh and Jackie Chan are co-protagonists. They are on the same path with the same goal. Here you have protagonists that actually want different, they are antagonists towards one another. So they're both kind of the good guys, and they are the protagonists in that their action drives the film. Both of them are doing things that drive the plot of the film from the beginning until the end. And so they are the protagonists, but they are antagonists to one another because their goals conflict with one another. But they're both the good guy, and then you have an other bad guy. So it's like this character triangle, and it's really, really fascinating. And a lot of what the film is looking at is it's taking a revenge tale, and then it's looking at the morality around that and revenge that takes place over a period of time. And do people change? Can people change? If people change, is revenge still appropriate? what do you gain from forgiveness? Is forgiveness more powerful than revenge? Like it's a satisfying beat the crap out of people, blood flying everywhere, martial arts, like shoot from the hip, Jimmy Wang Yu style movie, which I actually also saw spaghetti Western influence in too, which Frank Zhang actually talks about on his commentary track. Like I see a big spaghetti Western influence on this film, and I see a big Japanese influence. Now the Japanese influence might be coming from Jimmy Wang Yu, because as I've talked about in my reviews of his films, there's a huge Japanese influence on his films, but the use of like slow zooms to build tension, the use of silence to build tension. There's a lot of filmmaking techniques in this movie that remind me of classic Japanese cinema from like the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. And so it's a satisfying revenge, kung fu, blood-soaked, beat the crap out of the bad guys. Like Sam Deegan in her commentary track says that Angela Mao is almost like the Terminator. Like she never sweats, she never changes the expression on her face. She just fucking destroys people, right? But it looks at complex morality, and it has these kind of interesting plot twists where things happen that you don't expect. And it's also one of these movies I love as a narrative device. I love it when we enter in the present tense and events are unfolding that are unfolding because of what has happened in the past. And then what happens in the past comes to bear upon the present, and you start to learn the backstory of these characters and why they are the way they are and what made them that way. And there's no flashbacks in this, but you hear about their past, and that comes into the present and affects who they are and why they're doing what they're doing. I think that's a really fascinating narrative device, because I think it gives you a lot of depth of character, and it sparks your imagination, because if you're not going into a flashback, you're imagining what the past was like, and it engages you with the material because your imagination is actively running through these scenarios and what you're hearing about. And it's like a mythology almost, that in the way that you would get in like a sci-fi or fantasy movie, that draws you in, that extends beyond the simple present tense narrative. I really like that as a device. I'm just looking at my notes here to see if there's anything else I wanted to mention about this film. But and Zatoichi, I also, again, maybe coming from the Jimmy Wang Yu influence, but like a lot of the locations, the way the locations are shot and the way the villains are set up, what the villains kind of goal is, what they're kind of, why they're there and what they're doing is very Zatoichi-esque. There's like a gambling scene in this movie, always reminds me of Zatoichi because he's always doing gambling, right? There's always like that element of the Zatoichi movie. And there's just butt tons of fighting in this movie. There's really good outdoor locations, which I really like because you see the weather. I think they shot this movie like maybe it takes place in the late fall. So maybe they shot it late fall, winter, early spring. You see like people's breath in the air because it's cold. You see this kind of like fog. It's got texture to it that I really liked, and it looks fantastic. This is a new, I think these are 2K scans. Yeah, so both films presented in 1080p from new 2K scans across 2 Blu-ray discs. And I should also say there's the original Mandarin and English with subtitles for both of these films. And then on Hapkido, there's an English dub that's in 5.1. So I think that's a good overview of the first film. To get into the bonus material on the first film, so there's actually 2 Angela Mao interviews, and I'm going to talk about both of these, but there's one on each disc. One is 13 minutes, one is 17 minutes. They were both conducted by Frank Zhang, brand new in 2022 for this release. So there's 30 minutes worth of Angela Mao interview. She kind of covers her whole career. She's from Taiwan. She talked about growing up there. She talks about how she met the director of these films, how she got into the film industry in the first place, what it was like being at Golden Harvest in the early years, kind of the environment there, her training in martial arts, like how she kind of, like how she learned it and how she applied it to the film. She talks about Bruce Lee, what it was like working with Bruce Lee, how she ended up working with Bruce Lee. She said that he was a very polite and kind person, and that sometimes he has a reputation for being kind of a hard ass or not easy to get along with. She said she didn't see that from him at all. And there's just really good interviews. She's she seems like she's got a really sharp memory, a really sharp mind, and it's just really fascinating to hear her talk about these films. There's also a 31-minute interview with her son, which is really cool because they own a restaurant in Queens, New York. If you didn't know that, Angela Mao runs a restaurant, and you can go there and you can meet Angela Mao, right? So like Frank Zhang has been there, and Times Square Kung Fu has been there and met her, and like all these like Bobby Samuels and all these people. And so the son talks about what it was like growing up with, the thing that really stood out to me with the interview with the son was he was talking about watching TV with a bunch of his friends on like a Sunday afternoon, and a Bruce Lee movie was on, and his mom showed up in the movie, and his friends were like, dude, is that your mom? Like they're looking behind them like, wait a minute, your mom is in this Bruce Lee movie? Like what the hell? And how like people didn't know that she was famous, and like, because he grew up in New York, right? And it's just like, it's really, really interesting to hear him talk about that, and then talk about how he kind of started to understand his mom's celebrity and how he deals with people who come looking for autographs like at the restaurant, and about about the restaurant and how they started the restaurant, the different locations they've been at, like the kind of cuisine that they make. It's really, really cool interview. And he's a really cool dude. That's Frank did that one too. So now the commentary tracks. Oh, I should also say that there are 3 archival interviews on the Hapkido disc. I'm going to try to blow through all the extras right now just to talk about them, and then I'll talk about Hapkido as a film. There are archival interviews with Angela Mao, Carter Wong, Sammo Hung, and Yoon Biu. The Sammo Hung and Yoon Biu is like a single interview that they're in there together, and I think it's like 10 minutes long. And then the Carter Wong one is a little bit longer, and the Angela Mao one is, I think those are closer to like 20 minutes. And it's kind of what you'd expect from those older archival interviews. Like they talk about their careers working at the studios, how they got into the films. Sammo talks about how he ended up training in Peking Opera in the first place. You know, like Carter Wong talks about, he trained police officers. He was like an actual martial artist, I believe. So he talks about his training and how he used to train police officers and how he transitioned from that into the film industry and what it was like working on the films and like that kind of stuff. I loved Sam Deegan's commentary track. I think this is my 3rd commentary track I've heard from her, and this is far and away my favorite. I thought it was fantastic and fascinating. She talks about like the early history of Golden Harvest and how, and her commentary track is on, I should say, Lady Whirlwind. She talks about how Lady Whirlwind was a really important film actually in the early history of Golden Harvest, and she talks about, you know, how Raymond Wong and Leonard Ho, they split from Shaw Brothers, and they wanted to establish their own identity and what that identity was. She talks about the marketing for the films and how oftentimes the marketing of the films did not reflect the film itself, and how they were just kind of trying to sell the movie based on current trends and what people were watching at the time, and how that would create reputations for films and actors that were not necessarily tied to what they actually were, specifically in the West. And she talks about, this is something else I really liked about this film that I noticed while I was watching it. The female characters are not eroticized, they're not sexualized, and they're given like a lot of agency. Like they have scenes together. There's 3 main female characters in Lady Whirlwind, and they're given scenes together where they're just talking about, like, it's just 2 women having a conversation about something that's not about like, oh, I love this man, or like, oh, I have to have a baby, or I'm gonna go take care of the home, and like it's not the stuff you typically see in these movies. They're just like normal characters living normal lives where their gender does not define who they are. And Sam Deegan actually reads a quote from Angela Mao that was fascinating about how Angela Mao talks about how she didn't think of herself as like a feminist icon or a female icon, because to her it was not about gender at all. It was about the character, the part, showing up and playing it. And Sam analyzes the film and kind of talks about how no one ever says, oh, I'm going to fight a girl now, you're a woman. Like, and in Hapkido, that comes up. There's sexism towards the Angela Mao character. People sexualize her. People mock her because she's a woman, because of her, she's kind of small in stature, right? No one ever mentions in Lady Whirlwind, she's a woman, I'm going to beat her up, or I'll take it easy on you because you're a girl, or like any of that crap, right? That never comes up. Her gender is not part of that character at all. And that's really, really interesting. And Sam's analysis of the film from that perspective I found fascinating. So I loved that commentary track. And like I said, she calls Angela Mao the female Terminator, which I thought was awesome because she totally is like that in that film. So Frank and Bobby do commentaries on both of the films. If you don't know who Robert Samuels is, he is an American martial artist and actor who went to Hong Kong and became Sammo's like student protege basically, and then was in Hong Kong films. Like he was in Don't Give a Damn, which is a Sammo film. He was in Red Wolf, which is a Yuen Woo-ping film, and he's the only black member of the Hong Kong Stuntman's Union ever. He's Black American. He's from Philadelphia. He grew up in both Philadelphia and New York City. He just tells like these amazing stories of like when he was a kid, like one of his first jobs was he would like sweep the lobby and sell popcorn at like the Chinese movie theater in Philadelphia where they would show all these films, and he would go see them in New York City too. And he knows Sammo really well, and he talks about like Sammo hurt his shoulder really badly on Millionaire Express. Like that's one of the stories he tells over the course of these commentaries. He knows so many of the people in these films because he's like, oh, that's that guy. He used to come over to Sammo's apartment all the time, and like we would hang out with him, we would spar with him. Like he talks about like all these behind the scenes stories that Sammo would tell him. He knows a lot about like the development and the evolution of Sammo's techniques in the film, martial arts techniques, filmmaking techniques. Like he's just a really, well, actually something he said that I thought was fascinating is he mentions this in the Lady Whirlwind commentary. He says he loves there's authenticity in the simplicity of these early martial arts films. I thought that was a really fascinating quote, and I thought about that a lot as I was watching the films and thinking about them. And I thought those were great commentary tracks. They also talk about the Chinese name for Pennsylvania. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's really funny, and you should, because Bobby's from Philadelphia. You should listen to the commentary track just to find out what the Chinese name for Philadelphia is, because it's rude and it's funny. I was born in Philadelphia, actually. If you don't know that about me, so I grew up for the first 10 years of my life. I lived in South Jersey, like across the river from Philly, so I'm very familiar with the area, and I just thought that was really funny. And then Frank and Michael Worth. Michael Worth is awesome. I love his commentary tracks, and I love Frank. I'm actually going to do another interview with Frank. I talked to Frank yesterday, and we're going to do another interview in about a month. So I'm really excited. It's going to be in person. He's going to be in LA, so I'm really excited about it. So, I didn't know this. Michael Worth is like an expert on the Golden Harvest logos and like the evolution of the logos. So he talks about which logo they're using in this film and how it's different from the previous logo and stuff like that. Jackie Chan and Yoon Biu and Lam Ching Ying and like all these people are in these films, but you could I noticed Yoon Biu once. I think Jackie Chan plays two characters in Hapkido, and I saw him at least 2 times in Lady Whirlwind, but Michael knows where he is all the time. He's like, that's Jackie Chan there, that's him over there. Like you can see Lam Ching Ying here, there's Yoon Biu hiding over there. Like it's really, really cool. And they're so young. When I saw Yoon Biu, I'm like, he looks like he's 12. Like they're so young in this movie. Is really, really cool. Something else that Michael Worth does that I thought was really cool is he has a review of Lady Whirlwind that was written by Joe Dante, who directed Gremlins. He's like a filmmaker, right? But he was a film critic, and he reads the review of Lady Whirlwind during the commentary track. It's really cool. He talks about what defines basher films. Frank talks about like the box office that the films made, whether or not they were big hits. They talk a lot about how this film came out or Hapkido rather, I think came out like 7 months after Fist of Fury, and you see like a huge Bruce Lee influence on that film, so that's really interesting to hear him. One of the other things that Michael Worth talks about is you could see the evolution of the fighting style from one film to the other, and how in the second film they're using more props as part of the fighting to increase the kind of the visceral impact of the filmmaking and things of that nature. It's really, really cool commentary tracks. So, and there's trailers on here too, and alternate English language credits, and so that's my overview of all the bonus material on here and of the first film. The second film, like I said, sorry, dogs, very heavily indebted to Fist of Fury. Like we really see a heavy Fist of Fury influence on this film. But it's got really interesting characters in the leads. Like Sammo Hung and Carter Wong and Angela Mao play the 3 leads, and they're very differentiated from one another in really interesting ways, in the way they approach martial arts and the way they approach life. There's also a really interesting, I think, moral complexity to this film in that it emphasizes this inherent contradiction at the heart of martial arts, where they're trying to learn martial arts to have patience, to have grace, to have humility, and yet at the same time they are experts of combat, and they find themselves in these situations where they have to throw all those qualities out the window and beat the shit out of people, right? But in a really interesting way, it looks at what that means, that inherent kind of contradiction there, and it's a kind of a moral subtlety and a complexity that you don't often see in a lot of these films. So the music is fantastic in both of these movies. I have to mention that. Incredible music in both of the films. And Hapkido has really great sets. It's a very elegant and lavish looking film. They're both paced really, really well. And I just thought they were both really, really great movies. And I really enjoyed the crap out of them. Hapkido really is like a high quality, great narrative. Like the plot of the film is relatively simple. The 3 leads learn Hapkido in Korea, and they come back to China, and they become enemies of a Japanese martial arts school that's setting up in China. This is in the 30s, at the time of the Japanese occupation of Korea and the impending invasion of China, which was in 1937, I believe. The war broke out. And the Japanese kind of just like treating everyone like crap, like the same stuff you see in the Bruce Lee films and a lot of other, like in the Ip Man films as well, Ip Man. And how they fight back against that. But the villains are so good in Hapkido. Like they make you hate them so. There are so many scenes of humiliation and like debasement. They build the tension really well, and your hatred is like at a boil when it comes to the point where it's like, okay, now we're going to beat the shit out of these people. So my name is Will. This is Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. I really did love this release. These are like 2 of the most fun old school martial arts films I've watched this year, and I've watched a lot of them this year because there have been a lot of releases. This is from Eureka Entertainment. It is the Angela Mao double feature. My name is Will. You are watching Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. I thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.